Okay, hello. Thank you for joining us today. We will start in a few minutes, but whilst we're waiting for everyone to join, we've got over 400 people signed up today. So we're just going to play a short introductory video about the eBioAtlas program while we wait for all of the rest of our participants. Thanks.
All around the world, businesses, governments and communities are waking up to the threat of biodiversity loss. It's one of the biggest challenges facing humanity this decade. And there's one problem we all face: measurement. eBioAtlas unlocks biodiversity data at scale right around the world by combining high-tech science with the vast power of the global community. Living things leave traces of DNA that accumulate in water. In ponds, lakes, streams and rivers, coastlines and the open ocean, these traces describe the diversity of life. They are nature's fingerprint, and they give us biodiversity data at previously unimaginable scales. The DNA traces are easy to collect with a simple kit. So, from the fisherman in Malaysia to the school class in East London, the business owner in South Africa, or the tourist in the Peruvian Amazon, anyone can help collect the data we need just by pushing water through a filter with a syringe. The filter, with nature's fingerprint preserved inside, is sent to a laboratory where the DNA is sequenced so that it can be read and added to the eBioAtlas. The results give us powerful insights about nature in each place, bringing to life the variety of species that share our local environments. And when we put together all those local insights, we start to see patterns and trends at other scales. We can map the distribution of species, from fish to frogs, monkeys, big cats, and even bats, feeding into the global knowledge base on nature. We can quantify the impacts of our cities and our industries on biodiversity. We can start to understand what actions we can take at local, national, regional, and global scales to make a difference and turn the tide on the loss of nature. And we can design the right incentives for action. People say it's not possible to measure biodiversity. It is. We have all the tools to do it. With eBioAtlas, we're linking people with nature on their doorstep. And we're linking people and nature right around the world. Join us and be part of the fight back for the natural world we all depend upon. Because things that are measured can start to improve.
Great. Well, hopefully most of our participants are here now. So thank you so much for joining us to talk more about the eBioAtlas program. It's so exciting to have so many people, and it's a project that we've been talking about for so long. So we're really, really excited to have launched it to the press the other day and to tell you more about it today. I'm Katie Critchlow. I'm the CEO of NatureMetrics, and NatureMetrics are one of the founding partners of eBioAtlas, along with IUCN. So joining me today are IUCN's Gretel Aguirre and Will Darwell, my colleague Kat Bruce, the founder of NatureMetrics, Michelle Muller from Fauna and Flora International, and Warwick Mossop from Anglo. We're going to have some very short presentations from some of our speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. If you can add any Q&A that you think of, any questions that you think of, to the Q&A box as we go through. We probably won't be able to answer all of the questions in the Q&A session, but we will be sending some more answers and some more detail around to the website attendees and sign-ups after the session. So please do feel free to add as many questions as you want. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Gretel Aguirre, Deputy Director General of IUCN, who joins us from Switzerland. Gretel has over 25 years experience in conservation, and I'm really delighted she's here to tell us about IUCN and their support for the programme. Thanks, Gretel.
Thank you very much, Katie. For those of you who are not very familiar with IUCN, allow me to share some key information. IUCN was founded in 1948 as a membership union composed of both governments and civil society organizations. It harnessed the experience, resources, and reach of its more than 1,400 members organizations and the input of more than 18,000 experts. This diversity and vast expertise makes IUCN the global authority on the status of the natural world. The eBioAtlas is an exciting new project using the latest DNA technology, pushing back the boundaries for the species data collection. In freshwater ecosystems, this is equivalent to the underwater camera trap, but of course, much better. Imagine the possibility to rediscover species that we thought become extinct, the possibility to detect invasive species in time to act, or to detect threatened species. In other words, to discover what we have in a specific location. IUCN is currently conducting a data analysis for further understanding of global demands and assess the current market and landscape. This assessment will help coordinate and streamline existing global efforts and initiatives in this space. Let me give you some examples of existing biodiversity and nature-related data based on IUCN standards, as for example, the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, the World Database of Key Biodiversity Areas, Protected Planet, the World Database on Protected Areas, which includes the IUCN Green List of Protected and Conserved Areas. And now the eBioAtlas will provide high-quality data input on species distribution. This type of information is often in short supply, and notably so for freshwater species. Our partnership with NatureMetrics combine our respective strengths as follows. IUCN's global reach with regional country offices, members, and experts around the world will help to implement the sampling program. We will use our convening power to help to move beyond data towards action on the ground, to help bend the curve for freshwater biodiversity. Will, our next IUCN speaker, will explain the urgency for this shortly. IUCN has the experience and capacity in managing large global initiatives such as this one, with positive results and long-term impact. This capacity will be now combined with NatureMetrics' recognized capacity in the field of eDNA technology. Allow me to finish by inviting and welcoming others to join this groundbreaking endeavor through helping as implementing partner or as a donor, so that together we can begin this vital work at scale. We believe that the eBioAtlas will be a game changer. By filling in critical gaps in biodiversity data, we will be able to study organisms that are invasive or endangered. In a nutshell, we will be able to better target conservation efforts to tackle the extinction crisis. Many thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Greta. It's really exciting to have such high-level support from the IUCN. So now we want to dig a bit more deeper into the program. So we're going to hear from the two leaders of the program in NatureMetrics and IUCN. Kat Bruce, one of the founders of NatureMetrics, is going to explain why eDNA technology is so helpful in enabling this big mapping at scale. But first, we're going to hear from Will Darwell, the head of the Freshwater Biodiversity Unit, to explain why this program is so needed. Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Katie. Welcome to you all, and thank you, Gretel, for your introduction. So I'm here to introduce what the issue is, what we're here to talk about today. I think it's fairly clear to a lot of people that we are facing a global biodiversity crisis, and that this is particularly severe in freshwater ecosystems. So currently we lack the data and tools to really tell us how to address that crisis. And a few examples of how severe it is. In the last 100 years, we've lost approximately 70% of all inland wetlands. An assessment of populations of freshwater vertebrates have shown that since 1970, we've had an 84% decline. Yeah, that's 84% in our lifetimes. And the work that we focus on in IUCN, the IUCN Red List, of 26,000 species we've looked at, 1/3 of those are threatened with extinction. So clearly we need to act fast, and we need to find a way forward. So some people may ask, well, why does this matter? And fresh waters contain a very high proportion of global diversity. For example, you may not know that there are currently more described species of freshwater fish than there are marine, just. So we're risking losing species. We have clearly declining populations. And if that's not enough, these species provide vital services to people. For example, inland fisheries support hundreds of millions of people across the world. We also have functioning wetlands are essential for supply of quality drinking water, just quality water overall at the right times. And if you look at this nice picture of the grizzly bear on the right in the slide here, we can see an example where the salmon here has brought nutrients from the ocean well inland and is now a vital food supply for the bears. And furthermore, the carcasses of those salmon are fertilizing the riparian forests, which grow much faster as a result. And last of all, as an example, is disease control, of course. When you get an imbalance within a wetland, it tends to be the disease-carrying organisms that rise up, and we know what sort of problems that can lead to right now. So what do we do about this? Well, we know what to do. We have an emergency action plan drafted. It tells us all the things we should do. And in an ideal world, we would be having conservation action all over the world to address the problems. But of course, in reality, we don't have the funding to do that. So this means we have to prioritize which species to work on and which sites to work on. And this requires data. And this is the key part of this project. Data on species distributions is either not there at all in many cases, or is highly outdated. And in some cases, the work we do on the Red List, we're relying on data from the late 1800s, and nobody's looked for the species since. And it's not a priority for many governments to launch expensive field expeditions. So we need to find a quicker way to do this. And I should add that on the IUCN Red List itself, of 26,000 species, a quarter of those are classified as data deficient, quite often because we just don't know where they are. So we do have a solution, and that is the eDNA. And Kat is going to tell you a bit about that in a minute. That's environmental DNA. But first, I should just talk a little bit about how the project works and how our potential partners, we have conservation organizations, private sector, government, local NGOs, all we hope can help us implement this program. So we have an example here, the Malagarasi in Tanzania is a new project kindly funded by the Footprint Coalition, founded by Robert Downey Jr. And in this case, the Malagarasi it's one of the largest wetlands in Africa, yet it's very, very poorly known. There's not enough information on the species there to develop an effective management plan. And any recent surveys that have been done, only a few, have identified species that are new to science. So we're only just scratching the surface here. So in this case, our implementing partner is TAFIRI, the Tanzania Fisheries Research Institute, and their responsibility will be to help design the sampling program, implement the collection of water samples, and the export of those samples for analysis by NatureMetrics in the UK. They will work closely with a local NGO, the NYFD, citizen scientists, who are all ready to go. We have some river guardians already in place. You can see in the picture on the top right there. And they will be responsible for helping with sampling. And that will build sort of ownership of the project and ownership of the outcomes. They'll also raise local awareness. And finally, we're going beyond just collection of data, of course. And in this case, the information is going to feed directly through to a project funded by the Global Environment Facility, which is just developing. And also it will feed into the eBioAtlas and be available much wider than simply on this project. So now I'll hand over to Kat to tell us more about environmental DNA and to emphasize how it really is a game changer for increasing knowledge on species. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you, Will. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, eDNA stands for environmental DNA, and it refers to the genetic traces that animals and other organisms leave behind in their environment, especially in water. And we can capture the DNA traces from water just by filtering it using an incredibly simple kit, which NatureMetrics has tested over the last few years in environments that range from ponds to oceans and stretch from the equator to the North Pole. The filter is then sent to the lab where the DNA traces are sequenced and compared against reference databases to identify the species they came from. A single sample can reveal the presence of hundreds of species, including both those that live in the water and those that live nearby on the land. So the beauty of this is that it gives us a tool that can be put into the hands of people all over the world to collect standardized, traceable data on biodiversity at a scale that just hasn't been possible before. So we've long talked about this technology as a potential game changer in our ability to measure and manage for nature at scale. And eBioAtlas is the program that's going to deliver that potential by combining the technical capabilities in NatureMetrics with the global reach and conservation leadership of IUCN. And as well as data, this program is really about connection. We want to work with local stakeholders across the world, as Will's demonstrated in the Malagarasi project, to help build those connections between people and nature in each place, as well as them being able to connect insights at a larger scale to feed into the global biodiversity framework. So our aim is to collect and analyse 30,000 eDNA samples in the next 3 years, working primarily through the existing on-the-ground conservation programmes and their local networks. And this will be supplemented by large-scale community science programmes in some areas. And that level of sampling will really represent a step change in the availability of this standardised biodiversity data for the world's inland environments. The programme is going to be managed by IUCN, with NatureMetrics providing at-cost sample analysis and technical support. We're already building the digital infrastructure to securely house the database and enable its integration with other platforms, including the IUCN Red List and GBIF, the UN's Global Biodiversity Facility. All of the data, therefore, will be made freely available for research and conservation to ensure maximum impact. In addition, in the longer term, revenues from selling the data to commercial users will flow back into the eBioAtlas fund to enable ongoing monitoring. So this doesn't become just one more sort of static snapshot, but is really a living, growing database. Now, a lot of people and organisations are keen to know how and when they can get involved. So I wanted to take this opportunity just to highlight a few of the opportunities that are going to be coming up over the next couple of years. For the eBioAtlas team, our absolute priority for the first few months is to make sure the programme's fully funded so that it can deliver at the envisaged scale and speed. Meanwhile, we're also working on laying the digital foundations for the database and getting the key partnerships in place. So this means that most of the on-the-ground activities will really be expected to take off from next year. The conservation organisations will be our key on-the-ground partners for collecting samples and training local stakeholders in each place. So our first priority is really to link up with the organisations that operate at broad scales and can give us the breadth of reach across multiple geographies. So IUCN and FFI are a good start, and we're looking for a few other organisations to join them. And then smaller organisations that operate more at the sort of local scales can then be integrated into those regional networks. If you do have specific sampling opportunities though, so if you're sort of launching an expedition over the next few months, it's going to take you somewhere remote and interesting where you might be able to collect samples, then you can already provide details of those opportunities through the eBioAtlas website, and we'll be able to have a look at those and see if we can equip you with sampling kits. And of course, the conservation organisations are also really key users of the eBioAtlas data as it starts to be generated. We know there's a lot of interest from the academic research community, and we'll be creating mechanisms to integrate eDNA samples and data from third parties. So the eDNA scientists will also be able to use the eBioAtlas as a way to share their data and add species records from eDNA into GBIF and other databases. And then, of course, also as the data starts to build up at scale, that'll be available for biodiversity research through a simple portal. There's lots of ways that businesses can get involved, and I'd like to highlight the opportunity to become a headline sponsor of this programme, which will really fundamentally shift our ability to account for nature at every scale, from local to global. So if you're interested in that, do please get in touch with the team. But our corporate sponsorship programme will also let businesses sponsor the collection and analysis of samples in particular areas, which might be linked to where their businesses are operating, and could even involve getting their employees involved in the sampling. Finally, for businesses who are carrying out biodiversity monitoring with eDNA as part of environmental impact assessments, there'll be a mechanism for adding that data into the eBioAtlas, which can then form sort of part of the company's legacy and demonstrate real commitment to transparency. Probably starting next year, there will be opportunities for the general public to get involved, again in the sort of sampling side of things. We're really looking forward to launching those sort of community science elements of the programme, but just need to make sure we've got all the right support in place for that first, and the funding, of course. And finally, the governments have a really significant role to play here, both in terms of facilitating sampling and in making use of the data that's generated to inform biodiversity strategies at both local and national levels. And the IUCN team will be engaging with governments to help facilitate that. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of the programme and the various elements and timescales. So now I'll hand back to Katie to introduce the next presenters who are going to share some of their experiences in using eDNA.
Brilliant, thanks Kat and Will. Now we're going to hear from FFI, who are going to be one of our first implementing partners on the ground, taking samples and getting out there in the field. I'm going to introduce Michelle Muller from Flora and Fauna International, but first we want to hear from one of Michelle's colleagues, Shadrach Kowalian, who is project manager from the Sapo landscape, who we have been working with in Liberia. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us today, but he's recorded a video, which we're going to play now. Now, the sound isn't great, so you might just have to ramp up your volume as high as you go. And just if you can't hear it very well, just enjoy the beautiful pictures, and we will also share the video afterwards as well. So yeah, Ben, over to you to play the video of Shadrach in Liberia.
Hi everyone, my name is Shadrach Kowalian. I work for Fauna and Flora International in Liberia. I'm the landscape manager for the Southeast Landscape. I want to share with you our experience using eDNA survey techniques. In 2020, we conducted an eDNA survey in the southeast of Liberia, specifically in the area around Sapo National Park and the Grand Creek River G Post Protected Area. The goal of this survey was to confirm the presence of pygmy hippopotamus. Previously, we had conducted a community questionnaire that confirmed from the community perspective that these species existed in this area. We collected water sample to gather genetic material of species that have been using water bodies flowing into the Atlantic Ocean from this area. In total, we collected 20 samples. Of the 20 samples, we detected the presence of pygmy hippopotamus in 10. This is a fantastic result that underscores the value of this area for pygmy hippopotamus conservation. Beyond the pygmy hippopotamus, we detected 166 taxa, including primates, birds, amphibians, and fish. For example, we detected the presence of the tattoo, a very important species that had previously only been recorded in the Ivory Coast. With the detection of species like the tattoo, this information can be used by conservation planners and managers to inform better management of this landscape. The survey was conducted using local communities, and staff of the Forestry Development Authority, requiring limited training and technical supervision. It is a cheap, reliable, and importantly, scientifically sound way of confirming the presence of species in area identified for conservation. The results from eDNA survey can also be used to design more targeted surveys that will help conservation practitioners and the government to make decisions about management regimes for areas identified for biodiversity. We are very happy and excited to partner with NatureMetrics on this and look forward to more collaboration of this nature to help protect Liberia's unique biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. I'm so sorry that was really hard to hear, because what Shadrach was saying was so exciting. So anyway, hopefully Michelle, who's coming up next, can tell us a little bit more about FFI's work and what your experiences have been so far. So Michelle is FFI's technical specialist for biomonitoring. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. eDNA truly has been a game changer at the sites where FFI have used it to enhance our understanding of biodiversity present at these sites. Often these are data poor areas where it's difficult and time consuming to get data with traditional methods. For example, as you heard or perhaps didn't, in Liberia, eDNA was hugely useful in detecting presence of pygmy hippopotamus populations. This was particularly interesting as the pygmy hippo is an elusive forest dweller, nocturnal and shy by nature. In some cases, they can be even hard to get on camera traps. However, eDNA is a useful tool to detect the species in remote areas where data currently simply do not exist. In addition, having data about species presence and biodiversity enhances the case for area protection, which Shadrach alluded to in the video. But we also learned through those surveys what a wealth of biodiversity data eDNA can generate. Other species detected through eDNA surveys done to date, in addition to those already mentioned, are the white-bellied pangolin and the critically endangered killifish. And I might add, Shadrach alluded to the first country record for Liberia of the Thai toad, which to date has only been present in Ivory Coast. Even down to the invertebrates present in a landscape, eDNA gives you a full ecosystem view across taxa. That's why eBioAtlas is exciting. It is a quick and simple way of sharing data and will give us a comprehensive picture of biodiversity in the world's river systems, including terrestrial species. It's also a technology that is straightforward to use. Minimum training and technical supervision is required, with the potential for non-experts to get involved. That is important because the role of communities in conservation is vital for long-term sustainability and effectiveness. And it is within FFI's ethos to make data available to those that influence decision-making and live alongside and within conservation areas. It has become another tool with which local experts and local non-experts around the world can help monitor and protect biodiversity. eDNA's usefulness will only grow over time as more and more data become available to allow comparisons and cross-referencing between scientists around the world. So FFI is delighted to support the eBioAtlas project and be the first implementing partner. We are dedicated to embedding eDNA as a monitoring tool alongside existing monitoring methods in the sites we support across Africa, and specifically plan to continue using it in Liberia and across the border in Guinea, as well as rolling it out in Mozambique. Reversing biodiversity loss is a global effort without national boundaries, and we need global initiatives without institutional boundaries like this to achieve our goals. Thank you very much, Katie and the team, for having us on board.
Brilliant, thanks, Michelle. So now we're going to change gear a little bit and go to the private sector. This is one that I'm super excited about, because if we're really to address the issue of the biodiversity crisis, we must be working with the private sector and their investors to make sure that private sector and corporates know how to play their part. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Warwick Mossett, the biodiversity principal for Anglo American. Anglo is a client of NatureMetrics, and we're delighted that they want to share their eDNA data through the eBioAtlas platform. So I will hand over to Warwick to tell you more about when and why and what's going on.
Super, thanks Katie, and thanks everyone for joining. So I don't have any slides to share, but just hopefully just talk to you a little bit and then maybe spur some questions that we potentially get to. And I suppose a lot of people asking why would a mining company like Anglo get involved with the eBioAtlas project and NatureMetrics and IUCN. And I think it was mentioned earlier, with Kat in the beginning, is around the importance of measurement. And I think, a lot of our sites and our mining operations, we are monitoring and measuring our impacts. And in the past, using traditional methods, often, going out to consultancies and getting in, normally sort of teams of people to come and do some of that baseline environmental monitoring. And I think the beauty of this program is that, you can actually get that capacity and that capability to our site teams, to get them far more engaged in terms of the importance of measuring. But really for us is to be able to share the data. And I think, in the past, you just think about how much information is stored in these sort of environmental impact assessments, and never actually gets to be shared and gets into the hands of our scientists and I think, the sort of platforms that can actually utilize the data. And so that's one of the key objectives for us to do, is to make sure that, yes, we want to collect data that'll help us inform in terms of how we not only monitoring our impacts, but what can we do to change the way that we operate in the landscapes to potentially deliver some positive biodiversity outcomes. And if that means that we might potentially be finding species, that are of use, then absolutely we need to make sure that data is available. But importantly is absolutely to share the data. If we can't use it to measure, both from our own progress, but also within the scientific community, then I think we're doing the whole service a failure. So really, really good to be partnering with NatureMetrics and IUCN, and together with our partners Fauna and Flora International as well. What we've done is we've instituted a series of pilot projects using the eDNA approach right across our global footprint, and we want to showcase it internally and just show that it has the benefit of rapid analysis, the ability to generate big data at scale, and then more importantly for us to be able to share this and actually show how we're using this data to inform not only our decision making, but more importantly to make sure that we can contribute at a regional and a national scale to some positive biodiversity outcomes. And if we can make that information available, like as Will was saying earlier, the amount of data deficient species that are out there, if we can potentially just through one of our sites have a species which is uplisted from data deficient to potentially even vulnerable, that's an important output, and that positive biodiversity contributions. And it's something that's linked to our nature positive approach. It's something that I think everybody's seeing, now more recently in terms of global goals to deliver on a nature positive approach by 2030. And that obviously is something that we as Anglo American would like to support. So we are, really enthusiastic. We're very early on in the stage, and looking forward to testing the approach and the methodology, but more importantly, looking forward to sharing the data and making sure that it is available and used elsewhere. And I think importantly, at a business level, if we can leverage off other companies, and it's not just the extractive sector, it's all businesses and all industries can make a contribution. I think it's important for us to play a collective part in the whole process. So that's really just some of the thoughts from us, Katie and Ben. Happy to hand back over to you and look forward to answering some questions later.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Warwick, and thanks for your support. So I think that brings the panel part of the session to a close. And so we're going to take some questions, and we've had loads and loads of questions coming through. Maybe if all of our panelists can switch their cameras back on, so then I can pick on you for some of these questions. So the first one, it's about data, and I'm going to go to Kat and Will. So Kat, one of the first questions was just around, the data that we develop, will we be keeping that ourselves? Will we be sharing it? And I think you addressed that a little bit in your talk. So if you could expand on that. And then Will, there's a specific question about data sensitivities around finding endangered species and making sure that that data doesn't get shared with poachers and that sort of thing. So maybe Kat, then Will.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the sort of fundamental principles of the eBioAtlas program, and why we've been so keen to do this. You know, we are all collectively part of addressing the biodiversity crisis, and this is not something that can sort of wait around while everybody argues about what's available to whom. We need to get information and data and knowledge out there into the hands of people who can really act to make a difference. So the data will be freely available for non-commercial use. You know, there is an interesting question around this. I sort of mentioned that there will also be revenue streams created from selling that data for commercial use, and that's really both part of starting to understand and appreciate the value of this data, but also then creating sustainable funding mechanisms so that we can continue to do monitoring at scale around the world. So, you know, I think there's a bit of an issue with big efforts that then are sort of immediately themselves out of date. So we need to be keeping on with this effort to keep building, keep filling in the gaps, keep building the resolution, and also looking at how, you know, how much change has occurred. So I'll pass over to Will.
Thanks, Kat. So my question was on sensitive species, and a good question, I must say. eDNA is so efficient that if it's going to pinpoint exactly where these rare and threatened species are, and they may be the last ones or really important for the ornamental trade, for example, there's a risk of them being targeted by collectors. So as for the IUCN Red List, well, there will be a built-in system for tagging species that are sensitive, and that would mean that their locations wouldn't be shown directly on the website. For example, on the red list for data sensitive species, there might be a fuzzy sort of map showing vaguely where it is, but there'll be no precise information so that it won't be targeted by collectors. And that's something we would develop in consultation with the people who submitted the data, who know which species need to be protected in that way. So thanks for that question.
Great, thanks, Will. There's a few questions just about some of the mechanics of eDNA, Kat. So things like, you know, if the reference libraries for species to be able to actually identify them, species aren't there in a country, does that matter? And then also questions about what can eDNA really show us? Can it tell you anything about populations and ecosystems and that sort of thing, or is it just a presence absence for sort of big species?
Yeah, again, all good questions. So the first one about the availability of reference sequences, really important point. Currently the reference databases are definitely not complete. It varies a lot between areas and between different groups of species as well. So, you know, we quite often see that the mammals, for example, are pretty well covered actually, even in pretty remote and highly diverse areas. But if you take the fish in sort of tropical ecosystems, then often you can only identify about a quarter of them with confidence to species level. So we do need to be doing a parallel effort to fill in the gaps in the reference databases. And that's where, you know, it's so important for us to be working with the experts on the ground in the countries who have all of that sort of traditional knowledge, and all the work that the IUCN do with the red listing means that they have those connections and those networks that we can work with to do the barcoding, and barcoding will be is included in the budget for the program. We've got a really nice simple swabbing kit that lets us collect the DNA. But I think that the sort of flip side to that question is that even if you can't identify everything to species level initially, you've still captured it and you've still got its DNA sequence. So even if you can't put a species name on it, you can usually say, you know, what family it's from, possibly what genus it's from, And you can see where that same species is occurring in different places. So you can map it, you can see whether it's sort of becoming more or less frequent. And so that, and it can contribute to diversity metrics overall. So we can use all of that information. And then the nice thing about having everything centrally curated and standardized is that all we need to do then is just periodically just rerun the last step of the computational pipeline that processes the data, which runs it against the reference libraries, and that will just add on the new names to the sequences that couldn't be identified before. So that same information can sort of grow over time in the extent to which we can identify and interpret it. I think in terms of the sorts of information eDNA can give you, this is always a very sort of nuanced question. Different sorts of organisms contribute DNA at different rates and with different sort of consistency. So if you've got things like fish, which are in the water all the time, giving off DNA at a consistent rate, then it's not perfect, but we get pretty good semi-quantitative data, which shows sort of which are the dominant species in a system, which ones are just there at low levels. Sort of mammals and things that are just contributing little bits of DNA here and there, it's much more patchy. But as one of the things about this program is as you start building up the data at the scales that we're talking about, you can really make use of the sort of frequency and occupancy data to see how commonly things are occurring in the landscape. And that starts to give you a pretty good picture of how common or how rare different things are. And then, of course, we sort of talk a lot about the vertebrate species. Vertebrate species are only the tip of the iceberg for biodiversity. And in these eDNA samples, sort of sitting underneath all of the vertebrate data, we've got all of the invertebrate DNA, all of the microbial DNA, and these sorts of groups can give us incredibly rich information about the sort of types and conditions of ecosystems as well. So we can go a lot further than just sort of being able to talk about the presence of particular species, but that's our starting point, because that's what the that's what the sort of current conservation priorities are based on, and it's also what we can tell great stories about, and that sort of builds the engagement at all levels. So that's why we're starting there.
Cool. And what I was thinking, so there's actually quite a lot of eDNA mechanics questions, so maybe Molly or one of the team could post our webinars that we've done over the last year on eDNA and our Q&A that's on our website. So then if you want to dive deep into that side of things, Molly can share some resources to do that. So on to the next question. Charlotte Suring said, how exhaustive is the data that we can get from one sample? So I might ask Michelle and Warwick to kind of give from work that you've done so far, what did you find in your samples, and how comprehensive were the samples that you got back?
Sure. From the FFI sampling done, and also that Shadrach alluded to in the video, that was sampling done at 20 sites, single samples taken at each of those points. And from that, it generated information of 166 different species of mammal, bird, reptile, amphibian, and fish. And we were quite overwhelmed by the amount of biodiversity that came just from those few samples. And then in particular is also coming across species that we didn't know occurred in those river systems. We do recognize that, as Katie just said, many of those species haven't been identified down to species level, and we'll continue to work with NatureMetrics to improve that and work with local experts to identify and take samples from known species currently not in the global reference database. But that's just to give you an overview of from 20 samples, the sort of information that we got. Warwick, if you can add to that.
Yeah, much the same, Michelle. I mean, I think just to take an example of a site that we started working on at the end of last year, a lot of the local site environmental team had an assumption about some of the species that should occur there. But we had never been able to prove it, and through the analysis that we've done, amazingly have picked up that and have confirmed the presence of those species. But not only that as well, I mean, I think as you mentioned, to some of the invasive species, unfortunately, as an example, we did a wetland restoration project, which was fantastic. It created this wonderful wetland, but what generally happened is that you got a particular frog species, which has moved in, to the extent that it is obviously quite significant. But again, just showing you that if you hadn't had this rapid assessment tool, you wouldn't have been able to really ascertain just how much some of these habitats, what species were using it. So fantastic results out of a very short and small sample size.
Brilliant, thanks, Warwick. So then
Will's got a hand up.
Oh yeah, go on, Will. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, should we use the official hand up? No, I just want to add, because the thing that really struck me when looking at eDNA as a way of increasing the amount of data we can get was that these surveys you've been discussing, to do that through traditional means with a team of experts for all the different taxonomic groups, the expense and time to get this done, we've got to do this all over the world, it's just, it would take us decades. And the eDNA I just see as a really powerful way of moving us forward very rapidly. That's why it's so exciting, I think. And just another example of the added value from the FFI work, there was a species of killifish that Michelle mentioned. It's critically endangered and hadn't been seen for or recorded for 15, 20 years. And through the information provided, which we wouldn't have had otherwise, a key biodiversity area, which is one of these really important places on Earth for conservation focus, it's been possible to identify a site based on that data when the target was pygmy hippos. So the extent of the application is huge and really exciting. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Will. So coming back onto the topic of how we're going to fund this project, Peter Paul Grunhuser, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, asks, is there a strategy to involve large, e.g. asset management funds to close the data gap that's preventing them from investing in nature-based solutions and natural risk mitigation at scale? So maybe, Kat, do you want to talk about our sort of thoughts on the finance sector as a potential funder for the project?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are very much the sort of groups that we're hoping are going to be interested to work with us on this program. I think we're in a world now where we've suddenly realized that we have to be able to account for nature in sort of global economic models. And there was a report released by Credit Suisse earlier this year which said the investment industry understands that this is an incredibly urgent area that they need to be addressing, and the single thing that's stopping them from being able to do that and to create products and incentives is lack of data. So and what's more, the data that is there is it's not particularly traceable. It comes from lots of different places, lots of different methods. It's not standable, it's not standardized, it's not the sort of thing that can be easily integrated into these models. So yes, I think there's a huge opportunity for those sorts of institutions to get involved, to help create the foundations and the systems and the tools that will allow them to be able to create systems that really drive change systemically.
Great, thanks, Kat. I'm going to take my hosting liberties and ask a question to Warwick. For other businesses possibly listening that are doing their own surveying and eDNA work or thinking about it, why would a business want to be open about their data, and sort of tell us more about why Anglo American sort of want to take this step to be transparent on biodiversity?
I think it's really much more around your data or our data, and I think honestly we need to look at that collaborative regional landscape in which we operate. I think for too long we've been very blinkered in our approach. We only manage and monitor what is our responsibility and sort of what's inside the fence. And I just think that's obviously not going to get at a regional scale the amount of benefit that we want. And so if we can work with other businesses, and it might, even when we say businesses, I mean, if you think about some of the landowners and potentially even other land uses in and around us. It might not even be at a sort of commercial business level. It could be, commercial agriculture. As an example as well, one of the sites that we're at, we got one of the local farmers involved in terms of taking the sample, and suddenly you can start seeing the sort of realization that it's not just us or an industry or a business operating in the landscape. There's a much broader context to it, and I think that really is the importance of it. We've got to be able to demonstrate that we're operating in a shared landscape, and we have different impacts, but more importantly, if we can share the information and the data that we do collect, it can be used by others, within that landscape as well. So very important from that collaborative effort.
Brilliant, thanks, Warwick. And yeah, I think that it must be that the world's best biodiversity information is held in EIA reports and PDFs, and we have a saying now in NatureMetrics, PDFs are where data goes to die. So there's lots of work now to try and think about how we bring the information forth in sort of ethical, fair, transparent ways. And I think it's super excited to have Anglo American sort of blazing the trail on the fact that this information is more important than any one particular company or organization. I am going to head back over to Will, our Gretel now, and ask whether we really need another database. We've got GBIF, we've got Red List. What does the eBioAtlas add that some of the other things don't? And yeah.
Okay, I'll take that for a minute, Gretel. Yes, that's a common question. And the first thing is to make sure that the data doesn't just stay in a database and isn't used. And I mentioned that earlier, and I think IUCN has a very strong role to play there in ensuring that the information filters through not only to our own things like the Red List and key biodiversity areas, but is made available to other decision makers and through roundtable consultations. It really is important to go beyond just data. I quite agree. But the eBioAtlas itself, well, the first thing, I was learning about eDNA in the past, and I know it's going on all over the place, lots of little academic projects and research projects here and there, yet it's not all being brought together. And we've already seen that, if you target a survey on one particular type of, one target species, you generate all this additional information, which is not available. So to bring it all together is really important, and for academic researchers to realize added value for a start. So putting it into the eBioAtlas, first thing is that we can, and Kat and yourselves will talk more about this, I should think, but ensuring that it is to a particular standard, because eDNA is not straightforward in the analytical side, I know that, to make sure that the information is valid and that the species are, their correct identifications. Also that it's kept updated. We can have databases that don't have continuous updating going on. And the aim is to keep the information current. And also to stress that we will be planning to link to other existing databases to share information, and that we already have consultations underway or just beginning with some of the other key database holders, such as GBIF, for example. We've had discussions. So the aim is to build something centralized, linked to all the other data sets, high quality and updated. So
great, thanks, Will.
For that.
Brilliant. There's a question about whether schools could get involved. And so I suppose maybe I'll put to the panel a wider point about citizen scientists. Can we get them involved? How? And also, can we really get good information on biodiversity if a school child takes a sample? So
I'll jump in quickly on that one. It's one of my favourite topics. Yes, I think the potential to work with schools and education programs is huge. I think we've got such a great opportunity to bring to life a lot of the things that kids, are learning about anyway in a very sort of abstract way, and link it all together, link together the genetics and the ecology and the local environment, and get kids and all groups sort of out in nature and sort of building a sense of connection and stewardship for it. In terms of the sort of quality of data that you get back from citizen scientists, we've done quite a lot of work over the last couple of years looking at how the data that sort of completely untrained people of all different ages compares with data that we collect ourselves as people who have been doing this for quite a long time now. And, you know, essentially you can't tell the difference between a sample that's been collected by somebody who's followed the instructions that comes with the kit and somebody who's very experienced. And as a sort of citizen science tool, that's really unusual, that you don't have to then spend, you know, a huge amount of effort accounting for the levels of error that comes from you know, community collected samples. So, you know, I did a head-to-head with one of my colleagues, 6-year-olds, last year, and I think I narrowly beat her by detecting one extra species that she didn't find in her sample. But, you know, essentially it's exactly the same.
Brilliant. And I don't know, Michelle or Will, have you got anything to add on citizen science and work that you're interested to do?
I think, yeah.
Go on, Michelle.
To add, as you know, as we do camera trapping in similar ways, in involving community wildlife ambassadors or community game guards, having eDNA be a tool that can also be used in the same sort of way for monitoring. So I think a part of our focus will be to ensure that that tool is available, and training is given on how to take eDNA samples in those contexts as we would with any other biomonitoring method in the areas where we work. So over to you all to add.
I'll just add that I agree, it's one of the really strong points about this technique, really. And to get, for example, if you want to get industry involved, like tourism industry, so much scope there for people to become directly involved in monitoring what's in their local area, and getting, you can't fail to build interest when you get lists of all these species that you had no idea were present. So I think it's really powerful, and the fact that it needs so little training, yeah, it's a real strong point of eDNA. And we've got a huge global workforce there who can help collect all this information.
I just to add to that, though, I think what it does highlight is that it highlights the importance of how we communicate the results back to those different types and groups of stakeholders, and that sort of storytelling piece is going to be something that we'll put a lot of focus on sort of during the program. Just, you know, different ways of communicating with different types of stakeholders who have got involved for different reasons. We need to make sure that we're sort of making the most of that, and that people are really seeing the benefit of the understanding that's coming from the samples they take.
Super, thanks, Kat. Well, I think we're coming towards the end of the session, so I don't know if any of the panelists have any final words that they wanted to say before I wrap up.
Katie, maybe just to, yeah, sorry, just to say, to challenge, I mean, I think there were a few questions around, you know, obviously just the focus at the moment on freshwater. But, you know, I think, as we know, the application is there. I mean, we're looking at approaches around soil sediments to pick up terrestrial. You know, I just think this is the, you know, effectively the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it's got such applicability. So looking forward to, yeah, to sort of seeing how much further we can adapt this.
Yes, well, thank you. That's a brilliant bit of advertising there. So no, we for sure there's so much more you can do with eDNA. And I saw that question, but I thought, oh my gosh, that's an even bigger can of worms about soils and sediments and the marine environment. So I'm really hopeful that we'll be sitting here next year with the eBioAtlas freshwater fully funded and launching all sorts of other projects to look at biodiversity in other ways. So thank you for that. There are also loads of really important questions that we will make sure that we answer and send around a Q&A. There's ones about the Nagoya Protocol and access and benefit sharing, which we take extremely seriously, both for the eBioAtlas and all of the work that NatureMetrics do, and have got really good experience now in over 20 or 30 countries around the world, working with governments to make sure that we have all the right permits in place and all that side of things. There was one question actually about where are there places that we can't work, because we can't yet export biological samples, and there are a couple of places in the world that we haven't managed to work yet, like Indonesia, but we will be doing everything we can to make sure that we've got the global coverage by working with the stakeholders in those countries. So I think then, as I say, any more questions on the mechanics of eDNA, head over to our website and look at our webinars and our Q&A there. We will send out a follow-up with the recording of the webinar for anything that you missed, and also some more Q&A around all the important questions that you guys have been answering. So that just leaves me to say, if you haven't done yet, go to our eBioAtlas website, sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get all the information about what's going on, updates, and of course, if you want to contact us to be involved in funding, implementing, anything else, please do get in touch, and the team will be on hand to talk to you about that. So a huge thank you to all of our panelists today. It's really, really exciting to launch the project finally after many, many months of discussion. So thank you very much, and we're looking forward to hearing from all of you guys in the audience about how you can help us and get involved. Thank you. Bye.